What if I told you that the worst person in this story is not who you think it is? What if the man everyone pointed their fingers at and blamed was actually trying to hide something completely different? What if the real villain was someone nobody was even looking at? Keep reading, because in the next few minutes, you are going to meet a horse that cannot speak, but her body will tell a story so powerful that it will change everything. You will see a crowd of people make a judgment in 5 seconds that will take years to understand. And you will discover that sometimes the person we blame is not the person we should be angry at. This is not a simple story about a bad man and a suffering horse. This is something much deeper, much more complicated, and much more real than that thought. The morning started like any other morning on Blackstone Ranch. The sun was just beginning to wake up, but the sky was still mostly gray and heavy with clouds. It looked like the kind of sky that was thinking about rain, maybe even promising rain, but had not quite made up its mind yet. The air was cold in that way that makes you feel like winter forgot to leave, like it was hanging around just to bother people one more time. Everything was wet. The grass was wet. The fence posts were wet. The wooden railings that divided the different fields and paddocks were slick and shiny, with moisture from the rain that had fallen for 3 days straight without stopping. Martha Hendricks owned this ranch. She was an old woman, 73 years old, with hair that had turned white many years ago, and a face that showed every year of hard work and difficult decisions. She walked with pain in her knees and moved slowly, like her body was trying to tell her something that she did not want to listen to. Martha had run this ranch by herself for 40 years. She had built it from almost nothing into something real and solid and good. But 3 years ago, she had decided she was too old and too tired to do all the work anymore. So she gave the job to her son, Derek. Derek was a different kind of person than his mother. Derek was 48 years old, and he cared about money in a way that Martha had never really cared about money. For Martha, the horses came first. Making money was something that happened because she took good care of the horses and people respected her work. For Derek, the horses were just a way to make money. He looked at horses and saw dollars. He looked at feeding schedules and thought about how to spend less money. He looked at veterinarian visits and saw expensive bills that could be cut. Derek had only been running the ranch for 3 years, but those 3 years had changed everything about the place. This particular Tuesday morning, Derek had arranged something special. He was bringing people to the ranch. 50 people, maybe more. Some of them were rich people who had money to invest in horses. Some of them were neighbors from the surrounding ranches. Some of them were tourists from the city who thought it would be fun to see a real ranch and real horses. Derek wanted to impress these people. He wanted to sell them horses. He wanted to make deals and make money. He had told everyone to meet him near the big paddock at 9 o'clock in the morning. By 8:45, people were already arriving. They parked their cars and trucks along the dusty road. They walked across the wet grass, complaining about the mud getting on their nice shoes. They wore expensive jackets and designer jeans, and some of them had cameras hanging around their necks. They were talking and laughing, excited to see horses and to experience ranch life for a few hours. They had no idea that they were about to see something that would make them stop laughing. They had no idea that the next 30 minutes would change the way they thought about animals and responsibility and what happens when somebody stops caring. Derek stood near the fence with a big smile on his face. He was wearing his best hat and his cleanest jeans. He was telling stories about the horses, pointing at different animals and talking about their speed and their bloodlines and their value. He was using words like investment in future and profit. He was painting a picture of horses as things to buy and sell, not as living creatures that could suffer or feel pain or get tired or get sad. But there was something happening that Derek was not paying attention to. In the far paddock, the one that most of the visitors were not even looking at, there was an old horse. Her name was Stella. She was 22 years old, which is quite old for a horse. She was standing in the mud, and everything about her body was telling a story that nobody was reading. Her coat, which should have been smooth and shiny, was dull and rough and dirty. Her ribs were showing, which meant she was very thin, which meant she was not getting enough food. Her breathing looked heavy, like every breath was hard work. Her legs were trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper, from being tired, from being weak, from being slowly broken by not being taken care of properly. Stella had not always looked like this. Stella had once been a beautiful horse. She had once run in competitions and jumped over high fences and carried riders to victories and ribbons and trophies. But that was many years ago. When horses get old and cannot run anymore, they are supposed to be retired. They are supposed to have a quiet place to live, good food to eat, and people who take care of them. But Stella had not gotten any of those things. Instead, she had been forgotten. She had been moved to the back paddock where nobody could see her. She had been given cheap food that was not very good. Nobody had checked on her carefully in a long time. Nobody had asked if she needed help from a veterinarian. Nobody had asked if she was okay. The mud in the paddock was deep and sticky. Walking through it took a lot of effort. Stella's legs had to push hard through the mud with every step. Her body was already weak and tired. Using energy to walk through the mud was using up energy that she did not have very much of anymore. But Stella kept trying to move. She kept trying to walk, even though every step was difficult. One of the women in the group of visitors noticed Stella. She pointed and asked Derek if something was wrong with that horse over there in the back. Derek looked at Stella for only a second. He did not look worried. He did not look concerned. He just said something short and moved on, trying to get people to look at the younger horses, the prettier horses, the horses that were worth money. He did not want people looking at Stella. He did not want to talk about Stella, because Stella was a problem that he did not want to deal with. But the woman kept watching Stella, and other people started watching too. They could see that something was not right. They could see that the horse was struggling. They could see that she was thin and tired and hurting. They could see that she was in trouble. And that is when it happened. Stella's front legs began to shake more than before. She took one step forward, and her legs did not seem to want to hold her weight anymore. She took another step, and her body began to fold. The mud splashed around her hooves. Everyone watching became very quiet. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Stella was falling. The old horse could not stand anymore. Her body was giving up. She collapsed into the mud with a sound like something breaking, like something important coming to an end. She hit the ground hard, and her breathing became even harder, even more shallow. The crowd went completely silent. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody was taking pictures. Everyone was looking at the horse in the mud, and then looking at Derek. And in that moment, they all decided something without even talking about it. They decided that Derek was the bad guy. They decided that Derek was responsible. They decided that Derek had let this happen on purpose. But they were wrong. Not completely wrong, but not right either. The real story was much more complicated than that.
When a barn was demolished 6 months after the trial,
You usually do
torn
not
down,
feel it coming.
the land sold.
You just go about
a
your
new
day
family built a
thinking
house there.
everything is
Children
normal.
play in the yard
And then
now,
something happens
laughing,
that rewrites
unaware of what once
everything
stood
you
there,
thought you knew.
of the suffering
that
that
is
had
what was
been
about to
hidden
happen
behind
to
those
all
walls.
the people
The darkness has been
standing in
erased,
that muddy field.
replaced with light.
They thought they had figured
with
out
life,
the story.
with
They
innocence.
thought they knew who
but
was
Tommy
guilty.
remembers.
They
Will
thought they
always
understood
remember
what was
the
happening.
smell,
But they
the
were
sight.
standing at the
The
edge of
moment the
truth
door
that was so
opened
much
and
bigger
midnight stumbled
and so
into the
much
sunlight.
stranger than what they
That
believed.
moment is burned
In the
into
next few
his soul.
minutes,
A
someone was
reminder,
going to appear
a promise,
who held
a
secrets in
calling.
his pocket.
Some doors are
Someone
meant
was
to be
going to
opened.
speak words
No
that
matter
would
how
make
long they've
everyone
been closed.
stop blaming
No matter
the
how
person
heavy
they
the
were
lock.
blaming.
No
And
matter
the
how
real
many
story,
people say to
the
leave
true
them sealed.
story
Because
would
behind
finally
them
begin
might
to
be
come
something
out of the
dying,
darkness and
something
into the
suffering,
light.
Something
Derek was
waiting for
standing
someone
there,
brave enough
looking
to
red
care.
in the face,
Tommy had been
trying to
that someone
explain
at
to the
7.
shocked crowd
He
that
would be
Stella
that
was
someone
just
at 80
old and
for the
tired
rest of his
and
life.
nothing to worry
He would
about.
be the person
He was
who
getting
opens
angry
doors,
because
who
people
lets
were
in
not
light,
listening
who
to him.
refuses to look
People were
away
looking
from
at their
suffering
cameras where
just
they had
because it's
filmed
easier,
the horse fall.
just because it's
People
hidden,
were looking at each
just
other
because
like they were
everyone
sharing
else
a
already
secret
has.
that made
Midnight
them
was free.
ashamed to be around
Tommy was
Derek.
free. And the
One woman
darkness
was
that had
already on her
tried to
phone,
swallow them
and
both had
Derek
lost.
could see her
Light
talking
always
quietly
wins.
to someone,
Eventually,
probably
if
telling them
someone
what
is
she had
willing to
just
open the
seen.
door,
Derek was starting to realize that his plan for the day was falling apart. He had wanted to impress these people. He had wanted them to think he was a good rancher who could take care of horses. Instead, they were all looking at a collapsed horse in the mud and deciding that he was the worst person in the world. That is when Tom Wheeler came walking across the property. Tom did not rush. Tom did not run. Tom was 71 years old, and his left knee did not work very well anymore, so running was not really possible for him. But he walked with purpose. He walked like a man who had something important to say and had been waiting a long time to say it. He was wearing an old brown jacket that was stained with dirt and mud from years of working on the ranch. His face was weathered and brown from spending decades in the sun. His hands were rough and scarred from working with animals and repairing fences and doing all the hard physical work that keeps a ranch running. Tom had worked at Blackstone Ranch for 35 years. 35 years. He had been there longer than Derek had been alive. He had started working there when Martha was young and strong and making all the decisions herself. He had watched the ranch grow and improve and become a place that people respected. He had worked hard, and he had loved the horses, and he had believed that Derek would eventually grow into the job and do things the right way. But Tom had been watching what was happening for 3 years. He had been watching Stella get thinner. He had been watching other horses not get the care they needed. He had been watching Derek make decisions that put money ahead of everything else. And Tom had tried to say something. He had tried to tell Derek that things needed to change. But Derek would just say things like, "You are old, Tom. You do not understand modern business. That is how things work now." And Tom would have to shut up and go back to work, feeling angry and helpless. Tom had made a decision about 6 months ago. He had started keeping records. He had taken photographs of the horses. He had written down dates and notes about what he saw. He had even called animal welfare services and told them what was happening. But nothing had come of it because Tom was just one old man and Derek was the official manager, and it was hard to prove things unless someone wanted to listen. But now, Tom thought, maybe people would listen. Tom came through the crowd of visitors like he was walking through water. People moved out of his way because they could see the expression on his face and they knew he had something to say. He walked straight to Derek and he stood there, not saying anything at first, just looking at him with eyes that had disappointment and anger and sadness all mixed together. Then Tom spoke. His voice was not loud, but everyone heard it anyway because the crowd had gone silent again. "I've been taking pictures," Tom said. "For 3 years. I've been taking pictures and writing things down. I have all of it. I have photographs of every horse on this property from 3 years ago and photographs from today. I have notebooks where I wrote down every time I asked you to fix something and you said no. I have written down every horse that died or got sick or got sold away when they should have been retired. I have been keeping track of everything." Derek's face went from red to white. He opened his mouth to say something, but Tom kept talking. "I called animal welfare 6 months ago," Tom said. "I told them what was happening here. I told them about the horses that were not getting food and water the way they should. I told them about the horse that got an infection in her leg and never got seen by a veterinarian. I told them about Stella. I told them everything." The crowd was very still now. People were looking at Derek. People were looking at Stella in the mud. People were starting to realize that this was a bigger story than they had thought. One of the visitors, a man with a camera, asked Tom if he could actually show them the pictures. Tom said yes, and he pulled out an old envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside were photographs. Photographs of horses from years ago, looking healthy and strong. Photographs of the same horses taken recently, looking thin and sick and sad. There were maybe 20 photographs, and they told a story that nobody could deny. They showed exactly what Tom had said. They showed horses getting worse, not better. They showed suffering that had been happening slowly over time, so slowly that maybe nobody but Tom had noticed. One of the other visitors called the animal control office right then and there while standing in the mud with wet feet and a shocked expression on her face. Another person called the sheriff. People were filming everything on their phones now. The moment was being recorded from every angle. The moment was being shared and spread and documented. Derek was starting to realize that his whole life was about to change, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But that was not the most shocking thing that was about to happen. Martha Hendricks came out of the house. She was moving very slowly, using her cane because her arthritis was bad that morning. She was an old woman, and she was moving like an old woman moves, with pain and caution. But her face was serious. Her eyes were focused on Stella in the mud. She did not look at Derek. She did not look at the crowd. She only looked at the horse. Martha walked to where Stella was lying. Everyone watched her. Everyone was quiet. Martha knelt down, and kneeling down hurt her knees, but she did not make a sound. She put her weathered hand on Stella's neck. She leaned down and whispered something into the horse's ear that nobody else could hear. Nobody knew what she was saying, but they could see that she was crying. Tears were running down her old face and falling onto the mud. Then Martha stood up. Standing up hurt her knees too, but she did it anyway. She looked at the crowd. She looked at Derek, and she said the words that changed everything. "This is my fault," Martha said. Her voice was shaking. "This is my fault because I was too tired and too old and too lazy to do my job. I trusted my son. I should have been watching. I should have been here. And I was not. And that horse is suffering because I was not strong enough to do what I was supposed to do." The crowd did not know what to do with this. The rancher was not blaming her son. The rancher was blaming herself. The old woman was standing in the mud and telling the truth about her own failure. It was not what anyone had expected. It was not the story they thought they were going to see. And that moment, right there, was the moment when the real story finally began to become clear. Sometimes the worst moment in a person's life is not the moment when they make a bad choice. The worst moment is the moment when everyone else finds out about it. The worst moment is when all the lies you have been telling, all the things you have been hiding, suddenly come out into the open and there is nothing you can do to put them back. That moment was coming for Derek. The police were coming. The veterinarian was coming. The investigators were coming. And they were all going to see what he had been doing. They were all going to know everything. But here's the thing that Derek did not know yet. The Rayal story was so much worse than what everyone was thinking. The story was not just about a neglected horse. The story went much, much deeper than that. There were crimes hiding beneath the surface. There were lies built on top of lies. And when people started looking for the truth, they were going to find so much more than they expected to find. Martha made one phone call while she was still standing in the mud. She called Dr. James Patterson, the best horse veterinarian in the entire county. She had known Dr. Patterson for more than 30 years. She knew that he was expensive and that he did not always have time for emergencies. But she did not care about the cost. She did not care about anything except saving Stella's life. She told him his situation was serious. She told him to come right away. She told him to bring everything he might need. Dr. Patterson arrived 32 minutes later. He was driving very fast, probably faster than the speed limit, but nobody was going to stop him because everyone wanted him to get there quickly. Dr. Patterson was a man in his 60s with gray hair and a serious face. He had spent his whole life taking care of horses. He had seen every kind of sickness and injury that a horse could have. He had seen horses recover from terrible things. But he had also seen horses suffering from neglect, and he hated neglect more than anything else in the world. Dr. Patterson did not say hello to anyone. He did not shake hands or make small talk. He went straight to Stella and began examining her. He checked her heart. He checked her breathing. He looked at her teeth. He ran his hands over her ribs and her legs. He looked into her eyes. He was working very fast, but also very carefully because he could tell that this horse was in serious trouble. While Dr. Patterson was working on Stella, other people were arriving at the ranch. An animal control officer came. A police officer came. A detective came. People were beginning to understand that this was not just about one sick horse. This was about something bigger. This was going to be an investigation. The animal control officer was a woman named Susan Martinez. She had a clipboard and a camera and a very serious expression. She began to look at the other horses on the ranch. She walked to the stalls and the paddocks and looked at each horse carefully. What she saw made her angry. What she saw made her take photographs of everything. There was a young mare in one stall who had a cut on her front leg that had gotten infected. The infection had been there for a long time. The cut had never been cleaned properly. The horse had never been given medicine. The cut was red and swollen and draining liquid. It was the kind of injury that should have been treated immediately, but it had been ignored for weeks or maybe months. There was a beautiful stallion who had a severe limp. Susan Martinez could see that his back leg was causing him pain. When she examined the leg, she could feel heat coming from it, which meant there was an infection. This was a horse that desperately needed a veterinarian, but Derek had never called one. There were other horses eating moldy hay. Moldy hay makes horses sick. Good ranchers throw away moldy hay immediately. But Derek had been feeding moldy hay to his horses because it was cheaper than throwing it away and buying new hay. There were water troughs that had not been cleaned in days. The water inside them was dirty and greenish. Horses need clean water. Dirty water makes them sick. Susan Martinez took photographs of everything. She wrote things down on her clipboard. Her face got darker and darker, like a storm building up inside her. The detective was a man named Robert Harrison. He had been investigating animal cruelty cases for 15 years. He looked at everything that Susan Martinez was showing him, and he began to ask questions. He asked Martha when the last veterinarian visit had been for any of the horses. Martha did not know. She had stepped back from running the ranch. She had trusted Derek to take care of those things. She did not know that no veterinarian had visited the property in 18 months. 18 months is far too long. Horses should be seen by a veterinarian at least once or twice every year. Robert Harrison asked to see the financial records. He wanted to know how much money had been spent on horse care. He wanted to see the veterinarian bills and the feed bills and the maintenance costs. Derek tried to say that he would get those records later, but Robert Harrison told him that later was not good enough. Robert Harrison was a detective, and he had the power to get those records right now, with or without Derek's help. What they found when they looked at the financial records was not just about neglected horses. What they found was a crime. Derek had been stealing money from the ranch. Derek had been ordering expensive, good quality feed and selling it to other ranches and keeping the money for himself. Then he had been buying cheap, bad quality feed and feeding that to Martha's horses. Derek had been selling horses to auction houses and processing facilities, and instead of putting that money back into the ranch, he had been keeping it. Some of those horses were healthy horses that could have been kept or retired properly. But Derek had sold them to places where horses are slaughtered for meat, because he needed the money for something else. Derek had taken out loans against the property without Martha knowing about it. He had signed her name on papers. He had promised money that was not his to promise. Robert Harrison dug deeper. He looked at Derek's personal bank accounts. He got a court order to see Derek's credit cards and his personal loans and his debts. And what he found explained everything. Derek had a gambling problem. Derek had been losing money at casinos and online gambling websites. Derek had debts that totaled more than $100,000. Derek was desperate for money. Derek was stealing from his mother because he needed the cash to pay off his gambling debts. The horses were suffering because Derek was an addict. The horses were getting sick because Derek needed money for casinos. The horses were getting thin because Derek was spending the money that should have gone to feed on bets that he was losing. Martha Hendricks was sitting on a bench outside the barn when Robert Harrison told her all of this. She sat very still. She did not cry. She did not yell. She just sat there, looking older and more broken than she had ever looked before. Her son had stolen from her. Her son had lied to her. Her son had hurt animals because of his own problems. Her son had taken the trust that she had given him and used it to destroy everything. Dr. Patterson finished his examination of Stella and came to sit next to Martha. He told her that Stella had a broken leg from a fall. Stella had a severe infection from standing in dirty conditions. Stella was very weak from not having enough food. But Dr. Patterson said that if Martha took action right now, if she got Stella the treatment she needed, the horse would probably survive. The horse would not be able to race or jump again, but she would live. She would be okay. She would recover. And Martha decided something right then and there. She decided that everything was going to change. She decided that she was going to take responsibility. She decided that she was going to fix what her son had broken. She decided that the horses were going to be her priority from that moment forward, for the rest of her life, if that is what it took. But first, there were legal things that had to happen. The police arrested Derek 3 hours later. They took him away in a police car while the crowd of visitors watched. Derek was crying. Derek was saying he was sorry. Derek was saying he did not know what he was doing. But nobody felt sorry for him anymore. Derek had made his choices. Derek had hurt innocent animals because of his own addiction. And now there had to be consequences. The police kept Derek in custody overnight. He was placed in a holding cell while investigators gathered evidence. While he was sitting in that cold cell, thinking about his situation, other people were working very hard to prove what he had done. Robert Harrison, the detective, was looking at Derek's financial records with a fine-toothed comb. He was finding bank transfers. He was finding credit card charges. He was finding records of Derek selling horses to auction houses. He was finding evidence of the loans that Derek had taken out using his mother's property as collateral. The evidence was everywhere. The crimes were clear and obvious. Tom Wheeler was working with the investigators too. Tom brought them his photographs. Tom brought them his notebooks. Tom showed them the dates and the notes that he had been keeping for 3 years. Tom explained everything he had seen, everything he had documented, everything he had tried to tell Derek to stop doing. Tom's records matched up perfectly with the financial records that the detective had found. Tom had been right all along. Everything that Tom had said about the condition of the horses, everything that Tom had said about the neglect and the problems, was proven true by Derek's own financial records. The animal control investigation was gathering information too. Susan Martinez had examined all of the horses on the ranch. She had taken photographs. She had noted which horses had injuries and which horses were malnourished and which horses needed immediate veterinary care. She had documented everything in the way that an official investigation is supposed to be documented. Her report was going to be used in the case against Derek. Her photographs were going to be shown in court. Her words were going to help prove that Derek had committed animal cruelty on a serious scale. After Derek was a man named Robert Harrison. He had been investigating animal cruelty cases for 15 years. The judge looked at the photographs. He looked at everything that Susan Martinez was showing him. The judge looked at the statement ask from Tom Wheeler. He asked Susan Martinez when the last veterinarian visit had been, and the judge decided that Derek had committed felony animal cruelty. She had stepped back from running the judge decided that she had trusted Derek to take care of the judge decided that Derek did not know that no veterinarian had visited the property's permission in 18 months. The judge set bail. 18 months is far too long. Derek's family paid by a veterinarian was released once, but he was told that he could not leave the county. Robert Harrison, he was told that he had to appear in court for his trial. You want to know how much money charges were very serious. He wanted to see the veterinarian bills and the feed bills. Derek went home. He went to his small house. Derek tried to say the other side of the property records later, but Robert he sat alone in his house. That later was thought about his situation. Robert thought about the gambling debts that he still owed, and he had the power to get those records that he was facing. He thought about the fact that everyone knew what they found when they looked at the financial records that he could not just about neglected. He thought about the fact that they found was going to have to testify. Derek had been stealing money from the ranch. Derek had been ordering expensive 3 days after his court hearing and Derek packed some clothes into a bag and keeping the money. He took some cash that he had hidden away. Then he had been buying. He left a note on his kitchen table that said only and feeding that to Martha's horses. I cannot face Derek had been selling horses. He drove away from auction houses and processing facilities. He drove east, and instead of putting that money back in the ranch, he had avoiding highways that had some of those horses were healthy disappear into the country that could have been kept. He ended up in Nevada properly, living in a small apartment. But Derek had sold them to places where doing odd jobs for cash under the table because he needed the money who did not exist. Derek had taken out loans to his mother 6 months later, without Martha knowing about it. Saying signed her name on he was sorry, but he could not. He had promised money that was Martha received that letter, and Robert Harrison dug and then threw it away. He looked at Derek's personal bank accounts. She never tried a court order to see Derek's credit cards. She decided personal loans. You have to let go of. And what he found explained only hurts you more. Derek had a gambling broken things. Derek had been losing money at casinos. While Derek was running away, online gambling Martha was doing the opposite. Derek had Martha was facing totaled more than Martha was facing her failure. Martha was facing her responsibility. Derek was stealing from his mother
facing the
because he
damage
needed
that
the
had been
cash
done
to pay
and
off, deciding that she was going to spend the rest of her life. The horses were suffering because the day after Derek disappeared, the horses were getting sick because Derek called a real estate agent for casinos. She called everyone that she needed to call to make Derek was spending the money that should have gone to feed on what she wanted to do. And Martha Hendricks was sitting on a big bench outside the barn, but it was possible Robert Harrison she could do it if she was sure that she wanted to do it. She did not cry. She announced that Blackstone Ranch was going to change, looking older and more broken. The ranch was no longer going to be a place where horses had stolen from her, sold for profit. Her son had lied. The ranch was going to become. Her son had hurt animals. It was going to become a place where old horses. Her son had taken the trust that she had given years and used it to destroy everything. It was going to become a place. Dr. Patterson finished his examination of Stella, neglected, and came to sit next to Martha. It was going to become a place that Stella had a broken leg from mattered more than Stella had a severe infection from standing. Martha had to sell off parts of the property. Stella was very weak. She sold some of the land to pay for the changes. But Dr. Patterson said that if Martha took action her own savings, if she got Stella the money from the bank needed, using her personal credit to survive. The horse would not be able to race or jump again. She was putting her own security at risk. She would be okay. She was putting her own comfort aside. Decided something right that she believed in. Martha decided that everything was going to change. She hired young people who cared about she was going to take responsibility. She hired people who understood. She decided that she was going to fix what her son had broken. Clean water. She decided that the horses were going to be her priority. She hired people who would do things the rest of her life, if that is not the fast way, but first there were legal things. She brought Tom Wheeler back into a leadership position. The police arrested Derek. She told him that she had heard everything. They took him away in a police car. She told him that he had been right to keep records. Derek was crying. Right to call the authorities. Derek was saying he was sorry. She told him that Derek was saying he did not know what he was doing. But nobody felt a new title for him anymore. A new salary. Derek had made his choice. New responsibility. Derek had Tom became the supervisor of all horse care at the ranch, and now Tom became the person who made sure that every horse kept Derek in custody overnight. Tom, he was placed in an holding cell while investigators gathered evidence. Became one of the most important. While he was sitting in that cold cell, Martha personally took over the care of Stella. Other people were working very hard to prove what he had done. Dr. Patterson came to the ranch, detective, 4 times was looking at Derek's financial Stella's broken fine-toothed comb. He treated her infection. He was finding bank transfers. He gave her medicine. He was finding credit card charges. He monitored her recovery. He was finding records of Derek selling horses every single auction houses. She cleaned. He was finding evidence of the loans. She prepared the horses Derek had taken out. She gave Stella mother's property. She stood next to Stella. The evidence was everywhere. She talked to Stella. Were clear and obvious. She read books. Tom Wheeler was working with investigators. Martha spent hours and hours with this one horse. Tom brought them all the attention and care. Tom showed them Stella had been denied for so long that he had been keeping for 3 years. Stella began. Tom explained everything he had seen, her breathing, everything he had documented, everything he had tried to tell Derek. Her ribs became less visible as she gained weight. Tom's records matched up perfectly with the financial records. The infection had cleared up. Tom had been right all along. The broken bone everything that Tom had said about the condition within 6 months, everything that Tom had said about the neglect, within a year, Stella could walk around the paddock true by Derek's own financial records. The other horses on the animal control investigation too was gathering the young mare with the infected leg. Susan Martinez had examined all of the horses. The stallion with the infection. She had taken photographs. Got antibiotics. She had noted and he lived for another 15 injuries. And which horses were malnourished, and which horses that might have been sold to slaughter under Derek's management. She had documented everything in the way they got food and water and veterinary care and documented. They got to live out their remaining years in a place where they were valued. Her photographs were going to be shown. Martha's grandchildren. Her words were going to help prove that Derek had committed animal cruelty. They learned different values than their father had taught them. They learned that doing the right thing is more important than making money. They learned that animals have feelings and deserve respect. They learned that if you make a mistake, you have to spend whatever time and energy it takes to fix it. Within 2 years, Blackstone Ranch had completely transformed. It was no longer a place where horses were bought and sold. It was a place where horses were healed and cared for and given peaceful lives. The waiting list for people who wanted to adopt rescued horses became longer and longer. Families came to the ranch and left with old horses, taking them home to quiet pastures where they would never have to work again or suffer again or fear anything again. These horses would spend their final years with people who loved them and understood what they had been through. Martha published a book about her journey. It was called When the Horse Stood Still, and it told the story of her failure and her redemption. It told the story of Stella's collapse and everything that came after. It was honest and painful and hopeful all at the same time. People read the book and understood something important. that it is never too late to change your life, never too late to do the right thing, never too late to become the person you are supposed to be. The detective was a man named Stella collapsed in the mud. He had been investigating animal cruelty cases. She was 29 years old now. He looked at everything that Susan Martinez was showing him. Most horses live to about 30 years old. And he began to ask questions. So Stella was in the final season when the last veterinarian visit. She had spent those 7 years living in comfort. Martha did not Blackstone Ranch. She had stepped back from running a ranch. She had spent those years. She had trusted Derek to take care of those things. She had spent those years. She did not know that no veterinarian had. She had spent those years being loved by Martha Hendricks and Tom Wheeler. 18 months and all the people who worked at the sanctuary. Horses should be seen by a veterinarian at least once or twice. Stella would never jump again. Robert Harrison would never carry a rider to see the financial records. But Stella had something better. You want to know how much money had been spent on horse care. Stella had wanted to see the veterinarian. Stella had a home, feed bills, where she was valued simply because she existed. Derek tried to say that he would not because of what she could do, but how much Harrison told him. Children came to the sanctuary to visit Stella. Robert Harrison, the sanctuary had started a program, and he had the power to get those records students to learn about horses or without and about animal care. What they found when they looked at the financial records, these children would stand in front of Stella's paddock, and what they found was a crime. Tom. Derek had been stealing money from how this old horse had Derek had been ordering expensive, good quality feed. How the Real selling turned out to be much more complicated and much more important than he had been buying anyone cheap, bad quality. The children would listen, and their eyes would get wider and wider. Derek had been selling horses to auction houses. They would understand that how we treat animals matters. And instead of putting that they would understand that animals cannot speak for themselves. Some of those horses were healthy horses. They would understand that one person can make a difference. But Derek had sold them to places where horses are slaughtered. She did not become famous because he needed the money for something else. But in Derek had taken out loans surrounding the property. People knew without Martha knowing about it. People knew about the horse that collapsed in the mud. He had promised money. People knew about the rancher who was blamed. Robert Harrison dug. People knew about the old woman who transformed her life. He got a court order to see Derek's Stella represented something in his personal loans. Stella represented what he found when someone finally cares enough. Derek had to do something. Derek had been losing money at casinos, 10 years online gambling websites. Stella died. Derek had debts that totaled more than $100,000. She was in her favorite stall, the one with the best view of the mountains. Derek was desperate for money. Derek was stealing from his mother because he needed the cash. She had lived a long life, and she had lived a good life. The horses were suffering, which is all that any horse could ask for. The horses were getting sick. Martha found Stella because Derek needed money. Martha was 83 years old. The horses were getting thin, finding her old friend was spending the money that should have gone to feed on bets that he was losing. But Martha also felt Hendricks was sitting on a bench outside that Stella had lived these extra years. She felt grateful that those years she did not cry. She did not yell. She felt grateful that Stella had not died in the mud and more broken. She felt grateful that she had been given a second chance stolen from her to do. Her son had lied to her. Her sanctuary held funerals because of his own problems. It sounds strange to say that taken the trust that she had given him, but Stella was used it to destroy everything. More than Dr. Patterson finished his examination of Stella. Children came and came to sit. Teachers came. Martha. Veterinarians told her that Stella had a broken leg from people from surrounding ranches. Stella had a severe infection. People who had adopted horses from the sanctuary came. Stella was very weak from not having. They all came to say goodbye. But Dr. Patterson said that if Martha took action right now and to remember what she got Stella the treatment she needed, Martha buried Stella beneath probably survive. Old oak. The horse would not be able to stand on the property or jump again for more than 100 years. She had a stone marker placed there with Stella's name, and Martha decided something right then. The marker also had decided that everything was going to change. She taught us. She decided that she was 5 years after Stella's death. She decided that she was going to fix what her son had that she needed to step back. She decided that the horses were going to be her priority. She was 88 years old now. For the rest of her life, and her body was telling her that it was time to rest. But first, there were legal things that had to happen. Very smart. The police, instead of just handing the sanctuary to Derek, they took him away in a police car who might mess it up. While the crowd of visitors Martha created a board of directors. Derek was crying. She appointed veterinarians to the board. Derek was saying he appointed animal welfare experts, but nobody felt sorry for him. She appointed people who cared. Derek had made his choices. Horses and Derek had hurt innocent animals because Martha trained her successor for one full year. There had to be consequences. The police kept new person everything that she knew. He was placed in a holding cell. She showed them how to run while investigators gathered. She showed them how to care for the horses. While he was sitting in that she showed them how to talk to donors, thinking about and how to raise money. Other people were working very hard to prove. She made sure that when she finally let go, the sanctuary would not looking at Derek's financial records with a fine. She had trusted Derek. He was finding the sanctuary did not. He was finding credit card charges. Instead, it grew. He was finding records of Derek selling horses to include auction properties. He was
began
finding
to
rescue
rescue
horses from abusive
Derek had
taken out
situations.
using his
It began
mother's
to
property
offer education
as collateral
programs to schools.
The evidence was
began to work
everywhere.
with local law
The crimes were
enforcement
clear
to
to
investigate
investigate
animal cruelty
Tom Wheeler
cases.
was working with
The sanctuary
investigators,
became
too.
a model
Tom brought
for
them his
how other
photographs.
sanctuaries around
Tom
the
brought them
country
his
could
notebooks.
operate. People
Tom
showed
showed
from
them
other
the
states
dates
and
to
the
learn
notes
how
that he had been
Blackstone
keeping
Ranch
for 3
Sanctuary
years.
did things.
Tom explained
They wanted to copy
everything
the
he
model.
had seen.
They wanted to help
everything
horses
he had
the same
documented.
way. Everything he
Tom
had tried
Wheeler
to tell
worked
Derek
at the
to stop
sanctuary
doing.
for 10 more
Tom's
years.
records matched
after
up
Martha stepped
perfectly
back from
with the
daily
financial
operations.
records that the
He
detective
trained
had
new
found.
staff members.
Tom had been right all
He taught
along.
them how to recognize
everything
when
that
a
Tom
horse
had
was
said about the
sick
condition
or
of the
injured.
horses.
He taught them how to
everything
give
that Tom
horses
had said
the
about
best
the
possible
neglect
care
and the problems.
He became the heart
proven
and
true by
soul
Derek's
of his
own
own
financial records.
People who worked with
the
Tom
animal control
said
investigation
that he had a calmness
gathering
about him,
information,
a
too.
certainty.
Susan
that came from
Martinez
having
examined
done the
all
right
the
thing
horses
in
on the
moment
ranch
when it would have been
She had
easier
taken
to stay
photographs.
silent. Tom
She
had
had
risked his
noted
job
which
to
horses
speak the
had
truth.
injuries
Tom had
and
been
which
right to
horses
do
were
it.
malnourished.
Tom had
and
lived
which
his
horses
remaining
needed
years
immediate
knowing that
veterinary
he had
care.
made a difference.
She had
When Tom
documented
passed
everything
away
in
in
the
the
way
way
that
that
an
an
official
The sanctuary
investigation
held
is
another
supposed to be
ceremony.
documented.
This time,
Her
it was a
report
memorial
was going to
for
be
a man.
used in the case
Local
against
horse
Derek.
lovers came. Her
and told
photographs were
stories
going to be
about
shown in
Tom.
court. They talked
Her
about
words
his
were going to help
loyalty.
prove that
They
Derek
talked about
had
his
committed
love for
animal
horses.
cruelty on
They
a
talked
serious
about his
scale.
courage in speaking up, even when it was hard. Some people left flowers on Tom's grave on the anniversary of the day that Stella collapsed. It became an unofficial tradition. The old man who cared enough to keep records was remembered as a hero. Martha Hendricks lived to be 91 years old. She published her book, When the Horse Stood Still, when she was 84. The book was part memoir, part guide to horse care, and part honest examination of failure and redemption. Martha did not blame Derek in the book. Martha blamed herself. She wrote about how stepping back from responsibility does not release you from responsibility. She wrote about how pain and age had made her lazy. She wrote about how she had almost lost everything because she had not been paying attention. But the book was not depressing. The book was hopeful. The book talked about how it is never too late to change. The book showed readers that even if you make huge mistakes, even if you fail in major ways, you can still spend your remaining years doing things that matter. You can still make a difference. You can still be a good person. The book was successful. It was read by thousands of people. It was taught in schools. It was recommended by veterinarians and animal welfare workers. It became a classic story about responsibility and redemption. The Martha
detective was a
died
man
peacefully
named
at her
Robert
home
Harrison
on Blackstone
He had been
Ranch.
investigating
She was
animal
surrounded
cruelty
by people
cases
who loved
for
her.
15 years.
She had spent her last decade
He looked at everything
doing work
that Susan
mattered to her.
Martinez was
She
showing
had transformed
him, and he
a
began
place
to
of
ask
suffering
questions
into a
He
place
asked
of
Martha
healing.
when the
She had
last
saved the
veterinarian
lives of
visit
hundreds
had
of
been
horses.
for any of the horses.
She had changed the way
Martha
that
did not
people in
know.
her county thought
She had stepped
about
back from
animal
running the
care
ranch.
and animal
She had
responsibility.
trusted Derek
Today,
to take care
20
of those
years
things.
after Stella collapsed
She did not
in the
know
mud,
that no
Blackstone
veterinarian
Ranch
had
Sanctuary
visited the
still
property
operates.
in 18
It still
months.
rescues horses.
18 months
It
is
still
far too
cares
long.
for old horses.
Horses should be seen
It
by a
still
veterinarian
teaches children
at least
about the
once or
importance
twice
of kindness
every
to
year.
animals.
Robert
The waiting
Harrison
list of
asked
people
to
who want to
see the
adopt
financial
retired
records.
horses
You want
is
to know how
longer than
much
the
money
list
had been
of
spent on
horses
horse
available.
care.
You
Families
want to
come
see the
from
veterinarian
all over
bills
to take home
and the
a
feed
rescued
bills
horse
and the maintenance
and give that
costs.
horse a
Derek
peaceful
tried to
life.
say that he would
Nobody
get
talks
those
much
records
about
later,
Derek anymore.
but Robert
He never
Harrison
came back.
told him that
there is no
later was
information
not
about
good
what
enough.
happened to him.
Most people at
Harrison
the sanctuary
was a
have
detective,
decided
and he had the
that
power to get
details
those
of his
records
life
right now
are less important
or
than the
without
lives of
Derek's
the
help.
animals that he left
What they
behind.
found when they looked at
The
the
oak
financial
tree where
records
Stella is
was
buried
not just
is
about
now
neglected
the most
horses.
visited place
What they found was
on
a
the
crime.
sanctuary property.
Derek had been
Visitors
stealing money
stand
from
in
the
front of
ranch.
Stella's grave.
Derek had been ordering
and think about the moment
every
everything
quality
changed.
feed.
They
And
think about
selling
a
it to
horse
other
that could not
ranches
speak
and keeping the
but
money
whose
for
body
himself.
told a story that
Then he'd been
everybody
buying
needed to
cheap,
hear.
bad
They think about
quality
the
feed
people who
and
cared
feeding
enough
that
to
Martha's
listen to that
horses.
story.
Derek had been
something
selling
about it.
horses.
One
to
horse
auction
collapsed in the
houses and
mud on a
processing
gray
facilities.
Tuesday morning.
And instead of putting that
Everyone
money
blamed
back in
the
the
rancher.
ranch, he had
But
been
the real
keeping it.
story was about
Some of
what
those
happened
horses
next.
were healthy horses.
The real story was
that
about
could have been
courage
kept
and
or retired
redemption
properly.
and the power
But Derek
of
had
one
sold them
person's
to places
commitment
where
to do the
horses
right
are
thing.
slaughtered for meat.
The real story
because he
was
needed
about
the
how
money for something
suffering
else.
can become a
Derek
teacher.
had taken out
The real
loans against
story
the property
was about how
without
one
Martha
moment
knowing
can
about
change
it.
everything
He had signed her name on
forever.
papers.
And that
He
story
had promised money
Stella's
that was
story
not his to promise.
lives on in every
Robert
horse
Harrison
that is dug
saved
deeper.
in every
He looked
child
at
who
Derek's
learns about
personal bank
kindness.
accounts.
In every
He got a court
person
order
who
to see
understands their
Derek's credit cards
Equity and his personal loans real in his debts, something important, and what he found explained everything. Derek had a gambling problem. Derek had been losing money at casinos and online gambling websites. Derek had debts that totaled more than $100,000. Derek was desperate for money. Derek was stealing from his mother because he needed the cash to pay off his gambling debts. The horses were suffering because Derek was an addict. The horses were getting sick because Derek needed money for casinos. The horses were getting thin because Derek was spending the money that should have gone to feed on bets that he was losing. Martha Hendricks was sitting on a bench outside the barn when Robert Harrison told her all of this. She sat very still. She did not cry. She did not yell. She just sat there, looking older and more broken than she had ever looked before. Her son had stolen from her. Her son had lied to her. Her son had hurt animals because of his own problems. Her son had taken the trust that she had given him and used it to destroy everything. Dr. Patterson finished his examination of Stella and came to sit next to Martha. He told her that Stella had a broken leg from a fall. Stella had a severe infection from standing in dirty conditions. Stella was very weak from not having enough food. But Dr. Patterson said that if Martha took action right now, if she got Stella the treatment she needed, the horse would probably survive. The horse would not be able to race or jump again, but she would live. She would be okay. She would recover. And Martha decided something right then and there. She decided that everything was going to change. She decided that she was going to take responsibility. She decided that she was going to fix what her son had broken. She decided that the horses were going to be her priority from that moment forward, for the rest of her life, if that is what it took. But first, there were legal things that had to happen. The police arrested Derek 3 hours later. They took him away in a police car while the crowd of visitors watched. Derek was crying. Derek was saying he was sorry. Derek was saying he did not know what he was doing. But nobody felt sorry for him anymore. Derek had made his choices. Derek had hurt innocent animals because of his own addiction. And now there had to be consequences. The police kept Derek in custody overnight. He was placed in a holding cell while investigators gathered evidence. While he was sitting in that cold cell, thinking about his situation, other people were working very hard to prove what he had done. Robert Harrison, the detective, was looking at Derek's financial records with a fine-toothed comb. He was finding bank transfers. He was finding credit card charges. He was finding records of Derek selling horses to auction houses. He was finding evidence of the loans that Derek had taken out using his mother's property as collateral. The evidence was everywhere. The crimes were clear and obvious. Tom Wheeler was working with the investigators too. Tom brought them his photographs. Tom brought them his notebooks. Tom showed them the dates and the notes that he had been keeping for 3 years. Tom explained everything he had seen, everything he had documented, everything he had tried to tell Derek to stop doing. Tom's records matched up perfectly with the financial records that the detective had found. Tom had been right all along. Everything that Tom had said about the condition of the horses, everything that Tom had said about the neglect and the problems, was proven true by Derek's own financial records. The animal control investigation was gathering information too. Susan Martinez had examined all of the horses on the ranch. She had taken photographs. She had noted which horses had injuries and which horses were malnourished and which horses needed immediate veterinary care. She had documented everything in the way that an official investigation is supposed to be documented. Her report was going to be used in the case against Derek. Her photographs were going to be shown in court. Her words were going to help prove that Derek had committed animal cruelty on a serious scale.